Good afternoon. My name is Mary Dockin, Vice President of Outreach at IntelliSpark. On behalf of IntelliSpark and School Counselor Central, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar focusing on diversity, equity, and their overall impact on our students' social emotional learning. We have witnessed the pandemic creating even larger gaps in equity and new hurdles for our students to succeed for nearly a year. School counselors across the country play a critical role in supporting students' health and well-being in their school communities. Our panel today represents a distinguished group of school counseling leaders. I want to thank Derek, Emily, Josh, and Alicia for taking the time to discuss how we as educators can support our students and their families in these unprecedented times. They exemplify this year's National School Counseling Week's theme of being all in as they support their students and contribute to their peers' professional development. Before the discussion begins, there's just a few items I want to highlight. First, please use the Q&A for your questions. In the chat box, we will provide you with ways to connect with us, and all of the panelists invite you to follow them on Twitter and connect with them on LinkedIn. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you after the event. At IntelliSpark, school counselors are superheroes who go above and beyond to meet individual student needs every day. Our student success tools make it easier for counselors to coordinate care, breaking down silos in schools and with families to ensure every kid is known, not just about their scores, but who they are. In honor of National School Counseling Week, we're offering IntelliSpark School Edition at no cost for 1 year for schools that sign up by this Friday, February 5th. I invite you to learn more, and we will share that information also in the chat box. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Derek Francis, who's moderating today's panel. Derek is no stranger to School Counselor Central followers. He was a panelist in December for our webinar on counseling during a time of COVID-19. Derek has years of experience focusing on a proactive and equity-based approach in school counseling. He is the manager of counseling services for Minneapolis Public Schools. Derek also serves on the ASCA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team and as a professional development specialist for Hatching Results. I want to thank Derek for moderating today's panel discussion, and now we'll turn the conversation over to him.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mary. Appreciate our friends, our colleagues with IntelliSpark just being such strong advocates for school counseling and for this platform and this opportunity. So I want to make sure to share so much of a thanks for you all for making this a priority to have a conversation, especially during our week, school counselors. And so glad that you're here with us. I'm excited. Happy School Counselor Appreciation Week. I am so pumped to be joined by some amazing school counselors that I look forward to getting to introduce. Before I do that, I want to make sure that you all see this as an opportunity to grow and learn in some skills and strategies, but to also have a conversation. We're here to have a conversation like a fireside chat. So grab, I got a blanket right here. I'm kicking it, relaxing a little bit. Grab your favorite snack. It's School Counselor Appreciation Week, so get cozy. And also feel free to put in the chat what your favorite snack is. And so, because I'm one of those people, I'm a snacker. I love peanut M&Ms, and I like the almond M&Ms, and I like the peanut butter M&Ms, and I like having them all together. So that's my go-to snack. If I wasn't leading this right now, I'd be eating that and enjoying it. And
what
so
about the plane, Derek?
The plane?
Come on now. What about the plane?
I wish I liked those kinds.
I don't either. I don't get it. I don't get it. Sorry. Keep going. You were doing great.
No, it's all good. And that's the beauty of this is that it's going to be a conversation. We're counselor colleagues. We do this work together. We advocate together, and we're here to grow and learn together. So we ask you to please use the chat, connect with us, share questions that you may have, comment, because we're in this to grow and learn together. And so just wanted to make sure that you knew the space that we're going to be in. I am beyond excited to introduce each of the counselors that will be connecting and sharing today. And so I'll go ahead and introduce them. And after I introduce our counselors that are with us today, I'll have each of them briefly share with you about themselves, what school they're at, and then also they'll share a few. I told them I'd give them an icebreaker question. So the icebreaker question is, what is your guilty pleasure food snack item? Like that thing where you just enjoy it. You're like, oh, I have the craving for this thing. It could be a fast food restaurant. It could be a snack. For me, it's that thing that M&M bag that I get, and like I eat it in the car and I throw it away in the garage in the garbage so no one knows that I just tore up some M&Ms. So just wanted to I'll introduce you and then share what your snack is. So the first, and I love about yourself, the first counselor to introduce is Dr. Emily Goodman Scott. And she's with school counselors for MTSS. So I want to go ahead and introduce yourself briefly and then your favorite snack.
Thank you. All right. Well, can I start with my favorite snack? So Girl Scout cookies. It is Girl Scout cookie season, and our box of Girl Scout cookies, like we got a whole bunch of cookies, like a dozen boxes, and they literally just arrived in the last like 15 minutes. So I was sitting down, I had my computer on, and my spouse was just like waving a box at me. So I had one literally as I was signing on here. So it's my first Girl Scout cookie of the season. Makes me very happy. So yes, that was an easy one. But myself, it's so good to see you, and I'm so excited to be on this panel with these folks who I've seen their work and enjoy their perspective. So this is great. So Dr. Emily Goodman Scott, former special ed teacher, former school counselor at the elementary level, and currently as school counselor educator, I get to train the next generation of school counselors. It's such a privilege. I was on the board for the Virginia School Counselor Association for 10 years. I just wrapped up year 10 last summer as chair of the board. So that was such an incredible privilege and honor. And I'm part of a school counseling collective, school counselors for MTSS, and we do writing and research and get to work with school counselors, which is a lot of fun. So thank you for having me here. Good to see everyone.
Cool, awesome, thanks, Emily. Next, we have Alicia Oglesby. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Alicia.
Thanks so much, Derek. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Alicia Oglesby. I am a high school counselor. And so I'm a high school counselor in Prince George's County, Maryland, where I am the director of school and college counseling there, supervising a team of 5 awesome, incredible counselors. I also serve as a committee chair for Maryland School Counselor Association for the Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee. And I am co-author of Interrupting Racism, Equity, and Social Justice in School Counseling with my co-author, Rebecca Atkins. And so I'm excited to be here. I would say my favorite snack is those jalapeno chips. They are so good. They have them at most markets like Whole Foods and Giant and all of those. So definitely jalapeno chips. I love spicy food.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. You know, it's funny because my students usually to be like, hot Cheetos or Takis, which one do you like? Do they ever ask you that?
Yeah, I'm a hot Cheetos girl.
Yes,
For
oh my
sure.
goodness. Cool, I prefer hot Cheetos too. Thanks for sharing. Next we have from California, Josh Godinez. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and where you're at and what you do.
Thanks, Derek. So Josh Godinez here. I am a high school counselor at Centennial High School in the Corona Norco School District. We're about, probably 45 minutes east of Los Angeles. if you're not familiar with the area. And interesting, hot Cheetos, that you mentioned that, because the city that I live in, which is Rancho Cucamonga, is the home of Frito-Lay, and hot Cheetos was invented in the city that I live in. So full circle moment for the hot Cheeto right now. But a little bit more about myself. 20 years in education. I spent 10 years as a high school social studies teacher. And then now I'm in my 10th year as a school counselor. I am also the president of the California Association of School Counselors out here, and serve on a variety of committees throughout the state. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. For me, my favorite little sneak away food, and if you know me, this is going to be no surprise, is ice cream. Oh my gosh, I'll be sitting there, it'll be like 9:30 at night. I'm like, ooh, that soft serve right now. Ooh, who's still open? Is it the Wiener Schnitzel I want, or the McDonald's? Well, which one dips it? Like, I have full conversations all about, well, do I want the peanuts, or wait, is it a Reese's Pieces night? Maybe I want a Blizzard. Ooh, I'm doing a lot of free advertising for all these fast food places right now. But yeah, it's about a half an hour decision for about 2 minutes worth of pleasure when I finally decide what that ice cream is going to be for the night. So there you go, Derek.
Awesome. I'm glad. Thank you for sharing, and thank you all for sharing, because this is a week where we need to take time to step back and enjoy just the profession, enjoy the hard work that we put in, and just relish in the fact that I think this is the best profession in the world. I love being a school counselor. And so treat yourself this week, whatever that treat is that you enjoy. We shared ours. And so we want you to also see this as a space where you're going to hear us share and have a dialogue. And the topic for today is understand how to around diversity, equity, SEL. And so we have some questions that we'll work through, and we're going to leave it open for our panelists to share their responses. Again, utilize the chat as we're going through our questions here over the next several minutes. And so just to get us started, and just to give us some context of where we're at right now, we're in the midst of a pandemic. And then over the past years, school counseling has really stepped up its game with recognizing the need to have these types of conversations around race and equity and inclusion. And so to get us started, the first question is to kind of give us a space to work from, to understand terms and just what these words mean. So I want to get us started off. And I know, feel free, anyone who feels moved to answer it first. For you, what does equity and diversity mean? And how do you approach and implement this into your work? So anyone can jump in and answer that question.
I'll start. So when I think of equity, I think of what we are tasked to do as school counselors really is to meet the needs of our students, and knowing our school populations and our community, the communities that we serve, we know that every student doesn't have the same need. And so being a school counselor really is being in a position where we are tasked to identify needs and address those needs, essentially, because ultimately our goal is to make sure that all the students in our building thrive. And so equity really is about highlighting, celebrating difference, certainly, but also highlighting that different students and different groups of students need different things, and identifying what those needs are, but also making sure that we are meeting those needs in a way that is affirming to those students and to those particular groups. And then diversity really is about difference, and that, there can be many different types of difference in our school community: religious, race, gender identity, socioeconomic status of families. So there are lots of different types of differences that exist in our school community. And so essentially that makes our schools diverse in certain ways. And so I think that they are too important terms to be able to make a distinction and know the difference, so that we can know the impact of our work. I'm sure somebody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, and I think too, I would add to it, kids come with labels, right? And it's in our information systems, it's, in just society. I mean, when they walk in the door, you see them, and whether it's implicit or explicit, like we just know that it's there. But the one thing that I think that I have learned in my career, and as I'm talking to others, is the most important thing we can do is listen. Listen, let them tell you their story. Put all of the rest of it on the back burner, because you can't help it. You can recognize it, but you can't help it. All right. But if you stop and you wait and you listen, then you are able to meet the students where they are. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to do in order to promote equity, in order to support our students, is listen.
Thank you, Josh and Alicia. So, in listening to what you're saying, so agreed with all of the above. What I also think about when we talk about diversity is, I was having this conversation actually my class this week, is I'm teaching the intro to counseling class for our school counseling and our mental health counseling students. And I'm using a book, which I highly recommend. So I want to keep it nearby. I love the Interrupting Racism book by Alicia. I use that in some classes. This is like my intro class. This book is anti-racist. And I like it because it's written for like an adolescent, like a middle high schoolish, but I actually think it's a great tool for adults as well. Because it's really like, it's complex topics, but it's written about more simply. So, a 15-year-old, 14-year-old can digest it. But as we were talking in class this week, and we were talking about, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we think about the counseling profession. And I think, like so much of society, the counseling profession has very much been steeped in this like very like white dominance perspective. So, and hence the need for anti-racist work, because of the racism that's existed. You look at the theorists, the people that started counseling were mostly white men. And so we got into this great conversation about the need to go, and we're really in this huge movement right now that's always been there, but we've had it's been so much more mainstream recently, which I appreciate and we appreciate. And so going beyond that, so as counselors, knowing that some of where our origins are as counselors and how to go beyond that. So even seeing things like, this perspective, like what's multicultural counseling, or how to counsel diverse populations. And that almost comes from this white perspective of like, oh, white is the norm. So counseling other groups would be then counseling a diverse population. You're like, no, like it's all intercultural, like from one group to another. So I think we're needing to do some work right now around serving our students, but also I've been impressed to see this work that's happening with this perspective about kind of questioning, our basis as a profession and how to move forward very intentionally to, acknowledging again, this kind of white dominance and all the dominant cultures in our society, and how to move forward in a way that's more thoughtful. So I could say lots more on that, but I guess in a nutshell, and that as both Alicia and Josh said, looking at how that transpires in the schools, which is really about equity for our students, inclusion for our students, decreasing opportunity gaps, and systems, like systems work. I'm sure I'll talk about that more later. I could talk about systems all day, but I'll pause for now.
I want to just say something real quick, because I appreciate that text, Emily, because I think we do really have to be honest about our level of understanding of equity work, inclusion work, diversity work. And so many educators are really at a level of interacting and connecting with this work that is sort of like the very beginning and starting out, and questions about how do I do this work in my school. So even though that tool is or that resource is designed for young adults, or it's still useful because so many people are starting there anyway.
I completely agree. So I have this book. I have three little ones at home, 7 and under, and you know, looking at the children's books that I like to have in our home for them. And there's one book, I Am Jazz, and it's about a girl, and she's transgender. And but the language they use was very like simplistic, and the girl wrote it, and she was probably 7 or 8, and the book is in her own words. And but it's so like you know, I've been reading this to my kids for years. So let's say my oldest was like 4 or 5. I started reading this to her when we got it. So she understands the language, but I was reading it to a family member who's older, a generation older than me. And she said, "Oh, now I understand transgender." And I was like, "Yep, it's not just for my 4-year-old. You know, it's for someone it's a senior. So like senior citizen." So I think sometimes we can get so much from these concepts. So as we're doing like classroom lessons or school-wide initiatives, sometimes the things that we're teaching, you know, our K through 12 students, we're hoping like, are they rubbing off on the adults too? Because I've often heard, for example, like serving LGBTQ youth, what I hear from school counselors and students is sometimes the toughest population is actually getting the message across and getting the buy-in and the support from the staff, not the students. I mean, the students often too, but usually the staff is like the biggest hurdle. So I love that idea. I think you're absolutely right, Alicia, is how can we use these tools? Because sometimes they can be less like assuming, because there can be written for use. That can be really helpful.
Well, and I feel like if I can jump in there, because as we know, education was set up structurally, you know, way back when for the scholars and the laborers, right? It was already out of the gate set up to be inequitable, you know, and coming into today, you know, I feel like as we explore these ideas, it's scary to people. You know, it's scary to be able to say, you know, let kids have a voice. You know, what is it that, you know, we need to talk about? And to live in discomfort and not have that control when you are the responsible party is something that we as an educational institution don't do, right? We have bells, we have seating, you know, and I applaud all of the teachers out there that might be on with us, you know, that are exploring like flexible seating and, you know, how do we have open organic conversations and, you know, how do we let the intellectuals at, you know, 12 and 14 help lead and drive conversation and education? Because like you said, Emily, I feel like we have so much to learn from them. And oftentimes I find that the students are in such a better place with being open and accepting and embracing where we need to go for future generations to close these equity gaps.
As you all are sharing, I'm just sitting back, I'm enjoying this. I'm like, this is amazing. I'm like, I get to I feel like I'm hanging out in a living room with some really awesome school counselors. And so I'm loving this. Oh my goodness. As you all are sharing, you're sharing some things that are really important, I think, especially over the past year, when we think about all the things that have happened in our country, and we're in school spaces now, and we're having these conversations now where topics of race and gender and identity are coming up. Some people are uncomfortable in our buildings with having conversations or broaching the conversation of identity that their students and family members may have. How do you do that? Have any of you had experiences with having conversations with students or colleagues that can be that at times some people can be uncomfortable? Even some people watching now might be like, oh, I don't know how to have those conversations. So what strategies do you all have to offer, and how do you go about having these conversations?
I always say, you know, dialogue paralysis. It's a not a term that's out there, but it's one that I use with people. That is not going to encourage progress. You cannot have progress if you're afraid to talk. And I think that the first step is we have to unpack our own discomfort with it, right? You can't approach something you're not comfortable with, because when it gets uncomfortable with somebody else, you shut down. So I would suggest, if you haven't done this, or if this is uncomfortable, really look inside yourself. What is it that is uncomfortable for you? And really assess, why is that uncomfortable for you? And then when you are ready to approach those conversations with other people, You know, what is the outcome? What is the goal? Because you're right, we have these conversations with our kids, and we owe it to our students to be there for them and be that person that's going to empower them so that they can move forward and be comfortable to have conversations with other people when things don't feel right, when things aren't right, because that's how we are going to empower the next generation, not to sit by and accept, but challenge things that are not right.
Even in hearing you say that, there's so and the silence. I think sometimes when situations happen, if anyone wants to speak to just what that could feel like for students, because even with the events that have gone on recently, with whether it's George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor or the election or the insurrection, there's times where educators have been quiet or maybe just silent because people say, I don't know what to say, or I don't want to get it wrong. Any chance you all can share what that could be interpreted to students and families with that silence?
Alicia, do you want to go ahead? I'll jump in after you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Because I quickly lose my thought during these times. I think so. On the one hand, I want to say that silence is violence, and that not speaking up is can be detrimental to students. But on the other hand, I also want to say that saying anything is also potentially not helpful, and that counselors really, we are tasked to be to not be reactive always. And it's not that we can necessarily predict some of these things that happen, but some of it we can in a way. So I think for school counselors who are in school communities, knowing your school community is really, really important. And I tell school counselors this all the time. It's important to know the community in which you work. It's important, as a Black woman counselor in a majority Black student school, with a majority white faculty, that is fairly liberal, right? Like, I know my school community, and I know that I can request certain books or go to certain PD events, get certain things as resources in my office, because my community really, really supports that work. And so I can do that work, as the leader in my department, and I can encourage my counselors to also do that work. If you are a counselor in a community that does not support that, or a community that is going to be resistant for to you having a Black Lives Matter sign in your window, or resistant to you attending a PD about transformative social emotional learning, then that's a different kind of work that you are going to need to do on behalf of your students, and for yourself. And so I think knowing your school community is incredibly important. I also think that, Rebecca says this really often when we talk to each other about meeting your colleagues where they are. And that can be really tough. And for me, it's, I'm very privileged to be in a school community where I don't have to really go over certain terms, because a lot of my faculty and staff, like, they get it. They know what anti-Blackness is. They know what BIPOC stands for. Like, they know these things. But there are certainly people who don't. And so figuring out what that looks like for you is really, in part, knowing yourself and kind of, do I have the mental space, the energy, the wherewithal to participate in conversations about race, about equity, with people who believe otherwise or very differently from me. And if you do, take that journey together. Full disclosure, I don't have that level of patience. I don't have that level of energy to have those kinds of conversations day in and day out. And so find the people on your team who can help in that work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You all have said so many things. I started making like notes. I was like, oh, there's so much to unpack because I appreciate so much and like agreeing with this. So thinking about my own work, when I have these conversations, whether they're school counselors or school counselors in training, I have this image I often show of like, you know, a little plant like that seedling that is just sprouted and then like, you know, and then different stages getting bigger and bigger. And I say like we are all in different places in our journeys, in our identity development and our awareness. And this is okay. Where you are today, it's okay. How to have, you know, be okay with where you are, being respectful to others and hearing other voices, and knowing that it's still as a journey. So where you are, we still want to have, the goal is that we're always trying to grow and improve, increase our awareness for ourselves, where we are, what we have to learn, what we need to learn, also listening. I think, you know, especially as a white person, there's so much listening and learning. And I've gotten a lot from just listening to my peers, listening to friends, peers, colleagues, other people, and listening to their journeys, especially people who identify as BIPOC, right? And if you don't know, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So, so listening, my own, and saying this, you know, all of our own growth, awareness, listening. So I think starting there. I also think having courageous conversations. And there's a great webinar that ASCA put out in the last 2 who is in Kentucky at the Department of Ed there, as well as Dr. Jen Bettersby-Bond from Wisconsin and Natalie Edermanasinga out of ODU for me. But their session was great. And Damien led the conversation, and he specializes in this, and it was on the topic of how to have courageous conversations, especially around like race. And they had lots of like nice specific strategies and activities. They demonstrated some. It was like wonderful. So I highly recommend you watching that too. But one piece when we talk about courageous conversations, that I've been reading literature recently, research on leadership, school counseling leadership, and what's been interesting to me, it makes sense, but I just hadn't seen it before, is I think so was what the research is telling us as what I'm calling and others have called nice counselor syndrome, right? So we have counselors at schools, and when I interview like potential folks for the master's program in school counseling, what do we always hear? Like, oh, I'm such a good listener. I want to make a difference. I want to help. And we see the same thing in practicing school counselors. I want to help. And so in these leadership studies, they would find that school counselors often have a very high, when you look at different types of leadership, they have a very high leadership for collaboration. So they're collaborative, they're helpful. They want to pitch in. However, you know, the higher we see this collaborative leadership, do you know what we see lower of? It's like inversely related. The higher the collaborative leadership, the lower the advocacy and the systemic change. So we're seeing a lot more school counselors that want to like pitch in and help, but to ruffle feathers, to have those courageous conversations, to push, to advocate, to make systemic change. Like that's almost in some ways the opposite of collaborate. Like collaborating is like, or this thought, we're all going to get together and I want everything to be nice counselor syndrome. But in order to advocate, and what I've been talking about with folks lately is to have more time and space, I think, for school counselors and those, you know, in education, is saying, okay, we're teaching you to advocate and make systemic change, but then we need to prepare them for what's going to happen next. Because as we know, if we like push, we're going to get pushback. If we advocate, if we challenge, we're going to get pushback. And so how do we have this conversation so school counselors are prepared? Like, all right, they advocate for changing a system, changing something. I was talking to a school counselor today who has, you know, their personal pronouns at the bottom of their email. They're getting major pushback. Their school actually has asked them to remove it from their email signature. So we're talking about that. And she's like, well, how do I respond to this? And so when you get pushback, you know, how can we support our school counselors and how can you all support each other? So when you get the pushback, when you advocate and you get pushback, what do you do? And that takes a lot of courage and it's hard and it's messy. and it's exhausting, right? So I've been thinking a lot about those pieces recently, is you know, having courage, but also having space that's tiring and messy, and it's ongoing, right?
And I appreciate you saying that because, I'm in California, so we have a lot of advocacy, and, it tends to be a more blue state, right? So you find a lot more communities, where we don't necessarily have that pushback. And the counselors that I work with statewide, we put out, a position statement, on anti-racism, whenever there is an injustice, and that's what we take it back to. How does this affect our kids? Does this affect our kids? And if the answer is yes, we stand together statewide, and say, what do we believe as school counselors of California? And we put that out there. And we make sure that people know, because what that does is exactly what you're saying. When that counselor ends up in a school where they get that pushback, they can say, but look, this is what my profession says. And we are giving them the tools. And I would encourage those of you that are out there in state leadership, take those positions, support your school counselors, because they need things to point to say, I'm going in the right direction. And I have all of these people behind me in my professional organization or my Department of Education. Wherever it is that you find those allies and those leaders, go after it. And the other thing that you said, and I thought that it was important, is listening. We have to listen. And one thing that's been beautiful about the school that I work at is there is a real genuine care for the way that the students feel. And at the beginning of the year, we knew we were coming back to COVID. We were coming back to racial unrest. And then, Lord, here we go, second semester, and we had an insurrection right on top of it, right? Hello, welcome 2021. All right. But what the students did when we got back was said, we want to sit with you, and once a month, just come and have a conversation. Leave our titles at the door. You're not the adults. We're not the kids. We just need to talk. And that's what we've done in a restorative forum type setting. And the students set the little breakout rooms. The last one that we just had, we had an open dialogue with, how is it going with the teachers and the kids? And we had teachers telling kids, when you guys don't turn your cameras on, I don't feel like I matter. And those kids that had their cameras off, all of a sudden, they started to come on, and those students were saying, sometimes we don't know, how to let you know we're overwhelmed with the work, because there are 6 of you now, and, none of us are together. And so it really is a nice, leave your titles at the door. We call it vibe check here at the school once a month, at Centennial High School. But everybody is just a person. And all they're doing is sharing their experience through their lens. And we've seen it grow exponentially over the last few months. And talking about the insurrection, we didn't go at it with, we need to have the answers, because as school counselors, we don't always have the answers, and we don't need to have all the answers. But what people need is a safe space to be able to express how they feel and to be able to share their experience through their lenses. And if that's all we unpack in that one meeting at that one time, you know what? That's great. At least we gave you a safe space to process. And that's a start. That's a start.
I'm glad you shared that too, because I think so many school counselors over the past year found themselves in that position, and it was right in their face, where they had the decision of, I call it being a peacekeeper or a peacemaker. And I think so many times people are wanting to just be peacekeepers, let's just keep the peace. Let's not bring up that topic. Let's just let it be. Let's sweep it under the rug. And then there's being faced with, how can we be peacemakers? This is a hard topic. People are feeling uncomfortable, but let's make it a peaceful environment. And so I share that because you all offered some suggestions around that we need to have these conversations. So how about, especially for school counselors who are like, you know what, I don't know how to begin, or where do I even start? And so what are some strategies, some ideas of getting going to have some difficult conversations with your students, especially, let's say there's things that do come up either in the school building or socially or politically. What are some strategies to have those conversations?
like was mentioned earlier, I think part of it certainly is to have the courage to know that you are entering a conversation or a meeting, and you may not get it all right. You may not know, you might not be the expert at that particular time, and that's okay. But I also think that it's important for school counselors to know that you know, we're not the first to encounter any of this. There have been decades and decades of information that has been passed along um, that we can rely on. And so it's important for us to do our homework. It's important for us to find that humility and realize that we don't know it all, but there is information. There are resources that are often shared through social media, through you know, just being on listservs, all different kinds of options that we can take. You know, I regularly participate in webinars. There, you know, the pandemic is trash. We can pretty much all agree to that. But I do appreciate having so much access to webinars from across the country, across the world, right? Like I don't get to go to California State school counseling conferences, right? But now I do, because it's so much more inclusive now. And so making sure that you're signing up for those things, participating and learning from the other people who have been doing this work for maybe a little bit longer than you have. I think that's important because you start to hear the same terms. You start to become familiar with some of the people in our field who are doing this work ongoing and who have published articles and written books. So it does take a bit of homework. Like there is work involved in making sure that we do well by diversity, equity, and inclusion work in general. But there are so many resources that, like, really you could step outside and trip over them. But it's important to do that self-work.
And there's so many free resources. I mean, there's just so many. It's been an awesome time again to be teaching school counselors, because I'm like, look at all these webinars. And if I can share, so Derek, our, I think it was at the summer or the fall. It was the first class of the semester, and their first like assignment was actually to listen to one of the webinars that you did. Like that was like their assignment. And it was one of the ones that you did a series, you did a couple, right? It was like the first one. I remember I listened to it live, and it was so many, it was like this incredible. I mean, looking at how many people attended, the content was amazing, right? So it was you, Bobby Jameson, right? Marsha Rutledge, who are some of my like Virginia people. It was really good. It was wonderful. So following those, and they're freaks. I think someone just like set up Zoom and just did it. It wasn't through like an organization. Like if you have that handy, if you could share with folks, I mean, it was great. So there's so many great resources like that. I think also having a group of colleagues or friends, folks you can talk to. I have this ongoing text thread. There's like maybe 5 of us, and we work together, and we all have very different backgrounds, and we're just constantly like processing things. And also, I mean, it's like work stuff or just not work stuff, but the fact that we do come from different cultures is also neat. They're like, oh, look at this thing that just came out on social media about like, you know, something with like music or something totally unrelated. And maybe I wouldn't have heard of it. I'm like, oh, that's so neat. Like, let me tell you about this thing. So we're constantly like talking about like world and life stuff, or processing something that happened in the department, or this thing that happened on the news, or we're in a meeting and like, I'm really angry about what someone just said. Someone else is like, I'm crying. Like, so it's great because we're able to process with each other. And I remember as a school counselor, I had people like that too. We're constantly in dialogue as almost like this like peer support group, because they would like challenge to help me grow, but then also be supportive. And I would like to hope I was similar to them, but finding like your people that will like challenge and support you. And with texting, I mean, it's just so easy. So finding your people helps me a lot.
And I'm glad that, thank you for even sharing some of those resources, things that you do, because I think it does take humility and vulnerability. And to be honest with you, that's how even doing webinars started. It was right after George Floyd, and I'm here in Minneapolis, and what was going on is people were like, Derek, you're in Minneapolis. How's it going? Oh, what are you doing? Can you help us with some lessons? Can you help us with conversation starters? And I think after about 20 people hit me up, I was like, man, let's just throw a little webinar. Let's just get people together. And so then I knew Dr. Rutledge and I knew Dr. Ortman here. And so I was like, let's throw it, especially too, if I be honest, I think when people think school counseling, I highly doubt a lot of them think a Black dude leading counseling. And so sometimes even hearing that perspective, and I really encourage us, that's the beauty of school counseling, is that hopefully we can make it a more diverse field so that we have people in the field that are like, oh no, I know when I'm speaking, when I'm talking from the hurt that students are feeling, it's real for me too. And so I think that's why we need a dialogue, because we have people who have different experiences. One of my favorite parts around doing some of this work is talking to people who are in small towns who are like, I've never even worked with a counselor of color. Thank you for helping me understand how that would feel. And I think that's the beauty of having that space and having that mutual understanding as educators when we come to these spaces to say, you know what, I'm here to learn, I'm here to grow, and have that humility to say, I want to get better for my students. So I wanted to share that because when you shared that, Emily, it just reminded me of how this even got started to jump into doing webinars. So Josh, did you want to share before I threw a question out there to you all around social emotional learning?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that shared experience in listening, because, I grew up, I'm biracial, my dad is Mexican, my mom was white, and it was always interesting to me because the interactions and the permissions I was given was how I was perceived by the person who was perceiving me, so even that, being a biracial student growing up, being a biracial child growing up, where on this side, that's my tia, on that side, that's my second cousin, trying to understand, even within my own family, where you fit sometimes, and that's something that all of these incidents, it's so funny right now because the custodian's cleaning and he's vacuuming right now. So if you start to hear a vacuum, that's my office, by the way. So anyway, because he's getting closer, that's why I keep looking like it's like a horror movie over here right now. I'm like, go away, the other way, the other way. It's clean over here. Anyway, so exactly what you're saying, is we've got to be able to support our kids and listen. And I think that was the most important thing I took growing up was I can't sit and look at you and predefine who you are, and I can't escape at the same time that I have some implicit bias because society programs us. But I need to recognize that, I need to put that on pause, and I need to sit and listen. And you tell me who you are. You tell me what you value. You tell me how you feel about education. And then we'll go from there together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I mean, the timing to sit in that is so, it's just, I don't want us to even leave that, because it's, as you share that, I think about our country as it's becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. And we have people who have multiple identities. And so and I even think about my own daughter, she's biracial. So she sees two worlds. Her mom, when she's with her mom and our mom's side and doing stuff with their family, she's experiencing cultures and things that are different than when she's with me and my family. And so how do we help develop that sense of identity for students where they feel their fullness in who they are? Because there's so many times where students get to school and they're trying to fit in, or there's certain parts of their identity they're like, oh, I don't want people to know about this. So I think you brought up an area where I feel let's explore it a little bit, because our students, I feel, could use some of that support. So essentially developing student identity.
Well, I'm happy to jump in with a story. When I was a school counselor, the population where I worked, the majority of them were from India, like first or second generation. And most of the staff were like white women that looked like me. And, I could start to pick up on some things, maybe some discrepancies, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And it took really a couple years for the families, I think, to feel comfortable. And I ended up doing a family book club, so to speak, where so I'm meeting with these, a small group of parents weekly. And towards the end of that, some of the parents started to really open up to me about some of their discomfort with their school. And they just said they feel like they're losing their children. They have a very strong Indian culture and they feel like they're losing their children. They come to school, they love their teachers. They want to be just like, they're like, white European descent, like very, highly acculturated teachers. And they said some of their children feel embarrassed about their home culture. They don't want to bring in traditional food. They don't want to wear traditional clothing. They don't want to admit they have, different language that was spoken at home. So that when I started to hear that and like dig into that a little bit more, I found out how widespread that really was in the school. But again, it took me like 3 years to even develop enough where they trusted me enough of that relationship. So I think it takes a lot of time. But with that, I remember I did a series of lessons and I talked about like home culture and school culture. And I remember this little like pretest, like asking the second graders to raise their hand, like who has another language spoken at home. And this woman had twins. And sure enough, like neither of them would admit that during this pretest. We talked a lot about home culture and school culture and, how we can have pride in our home culture and pride in our school culture. And just talked a lot about that, like normalizing and celebrating. So I did this over like a series of multiple lessons and I was going in every 2 weeks at that point for classroom lessons. So after like this 2-month period, maybe I'd done 4 lessons, just another little like post test, like how many of you have another language spoken at home, asking different questions. And both of those students like raised their hands and like smiled and were proud, but just seeing that like shift where definitely they had some embarrassment at first. And I think like having the relationships with the families to even know what's happening. Because what if I hadn't done that like book club, I may have just missed that altogether. I could sense there was something, but I didn't know what. So I think that relationship with the community and people that can be cultural brokers, because that was the majority of our culture. And I was an outsider to that, but I was trying to serve their students. So I think that's a piece, but then, normalizing for students, like helping to celebrate. So that was just an example I have that I thought of in response to your question, Derek.
Yeah, and I would add that I really love the idea of celebrating. I know that school counselors who work in majority white settings find that a little bit trickier, especially if there aren't students in that community who belong to a particular race or culture or ethnicity. And so there are many layers to it. There's the micro level, there's the macro level of, the school system as a whole and where is your school located? What is in your building? Who works there? So it's kind of like the system that the students are in, but then also, the micro level, what your students are learning in class. I know someone brought up in the question and answer about our Eurocentric curriculum, and that's across the board at most schools in this country, at least. And so I think, if students are coming to school every day and feeling as if they don't belong, it's because we're making them feel as if they don't belong, right? As the adults, as the educators, as administrators, as the people who help shape the school culture and the school environment. And so I think there are a number of ways where we can interrogate that. There are a number of ways where we can interrupt that. So I think this week in particular, right? So it's also Black Lives Matter at School Week. And so if that is welcomed at your school, like really going all out. I know some counselors in Maryland have gone all out, some counselors in Virginia we met with earlier this month or at the end of January to really plan out how we were going to celebrate Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. We have certain clubs in our school. So we have very specifically Latina students in computer science. Like these are the actionable equity steps that we can take to show all students this is what happens here in our school community. And so that, when we do those needs assessments or we do those surveys or we're asking students and families about their experience, we can collect that data to see what we as the adults in the building are missing. So I think that's an important piece to it too.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
You know, one thing that you said, and I love, we have a great partnership between the California Association of School Counselors and the ACLU, you know, in our area. And that is one thing. I think that finding those collective partners, you know, across your communities that believe in what you believe and stand for what you stand for. And we've put out a wonderful document that we collaborated on, you know, that it's called Counselors Not Cops. And I know that that's one of the fundamental you know, mantras of this week, that we need to get more counselors in there to support kids. And, you know, it takes it back to exactly what you said, Emily, and exactly what you said, Alicia, at the beginning. Celebrate, you know, be genuine about asking those students about who they are. Because that's one thing, if a student doesn't belong, exactly like you just said, it's because we're making them feel that way as an institution. But imagine if we stopped long enough to ask for them to tell us more about themselves and figure out how we could incorporate things that matter to them into our schools, into our classrooms, and into our culture. I think that really is an answer for helping to create that positive school experience that every child deserves.
And can I just add it, because sorry, I just wanted to, it just made me think of like Josh really talking about this culture of listening, and when we create that, you can tell, and it's almost, it's kind of like you know, what do you call it, catch-22, I guess, because it's like we establish this culture of listening, and now the students are like, this is their school, they're making the decisions, you know, they're coming to you when they have an issue, and they want to make sure everybody knows when something is a concern. But that's exactly right. That's exactly what we want to see, students advocating and knowing that they will be heard and respected and listened to and affirmed. Like that's a beautiful, beautiful school culture.
And on that listening piece, you know, listening to the culture, our students, communities, families. So I'm hearing the phrase, instead of culturally responsive, I think we were using culturally responsive, but that's more of like this reactive, or we're responding, we're reacting. But I've been hearing a lot more this last year or so, culturally sustaining, how to sustain the community culture, how to bring it in, how to celebrate it. Like, oh, look, here's our diversity initiative. But it's like, no, it's interwoven throughout. Like, it is the school. It's not like an add-on, and it's not a responsiveness, but it's just being mindful that it is the culture of the school, not like a piece, I think.
And one thing I think, Emily, that you said that triggered it for me is we have to remember that there is no end game for this, right? Life is a journey. Generationally, every person will face, you know, highs and lows and obstacles, and we will always try and get better if we make the commitment to do so, though. And that's what we have to remember, is that we owe it to the generation that follows, that we will make that commitment to do better for them. We're not going to solve it. You know, we can't. And even the kids in our schools, our commitment is to empower them to then make the generation after them even better than they were. And that is, you know, give yourself permission to know there is no end goal. We're not going to solve all of this, but if it's a little better at the end of your professional journey, you've done a good job.
Yes.
I love it. And that we're learning, right? We're learning from our students. Like they're coming up, they're teaching us, like they're helping us grow. So we like keeping us on our game. So we're
and each other. You know, that's why I love like Facebook. I sit in those Facebook groups and I see all of these ideas fire off, and I'm looking at the lenses like, you know, what's going on in Georgia? What's going on up there in Maine? You know, how is it different in Florida? Because, you know, and I know that we're in some of the groups together, and I encourage everybody out there, get in these groups, because somebody will pose a question and you can see through the lenses of cultural experiences, regional experiences, how people respond. And then you can take that, all of that, and that goes back to that homework that Alicia was talking about. Do your homework and then figure out what you do with all of that to best serve the needs of your communities.
Friends, oh man, the the amazing wealth of information and knowledge that you all bring is needed in our time right now. And I wish so bad we had another hour to connect. I'd make dinner and come back and eat right now, get some wings going. That's what I'm treating myself to. I'm that serious. Let me stop because I am hungry. You know what, y'all? In all seriousness, this conversation, I'm glad you said this is it's not over. It's a journey. And if we can be honest right now, our country's at a time that we really need to start having these dialogues. And our country is divided in many areas. And so I'm in a dream world. I see school counselors as healing our country. We can step in there and say, let's bridge the gap, the divide, and let our students know that that they're all valued and equal and loved and cared about. And I encourage you as a school counselor this week, as you're listening, if there's times where you don't understand, I ask that you take a seat and you listen, honestly, because sometimes before you want to advocate and take a stand, you need to take a seat and listen and understand someone else's perspective from their lens. I want to, before wrapping up, I want to say again, thank you so much to our panelists and you all just sharing your wealth of knowledge and information with colleagues in the field, because this is how we do this work, is together. And also I want to say, so Emily, Alicia, Josh, thank you. And I want to say thank you to IntelliSpark for the space, for the resource, for the marketing material, for the energy of the people you have behind the scenes. All of y'all, it doesn't go unnoticed. And so we thank you all, because I know we're school counselors and we do our work, but man, you tell me to set up a webinar or you tell me to start a Zoom for this amount of people, I couldn't do it. So we got to say thank you so much to you all for the platform. Yeah. So again, on behalf of IntelliSpark and us as school counselors, I want to say thanks for checking out today's webinar. Please go ahead and check us out on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We have some authors in the midst, so go and check out their books. And I look forward to us growing and doing more of these webinars, and then also seeing each other once things open up safely at conferences. That'll be great. Josh, I look forward to meeting you. We've been having a conversation about meeting each other. And so I look forward to meeting you, Alicia and Emily, once things open up too, because I've been following you all, and thank you for pouring into the profession. Cool.
It's been so
Likewise,
great.
Eric. Thank you
Thank
for all that
Thank
do.
you. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I need my book signed, Alicia, please.
I got
For
you.
free.
I got you. I got you.
Come on now.
For
Hey, we're
free.
educated.
We'll chat. We'll chat offline.
Give me a book, Alicia.
They did it. Can I tell you? Like Josh, I actually got Rebecca. They signed one book for every member of the Virginia School Counseling Board.
Oh,
For them, they signed it, and that was like their parting gift. Was and it's such a great book. They were so great.
yeah.
And they were signed. So hint, it's a great.
Giving me ideas.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So great
y'all.
to see you all.
All right, well, thank
Yes.
you all. That wraps up this webinar. Have a great rest of the week, school counselors. Enjoy the celebration of our profession this week. Take care, friends, and have a good one. Bye.